listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with David Tompkins, who's the president of TFG Global Insurance Solutions, and he operates the expatriate division called Expat Financial. David, pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Tell me something, the organization or the division, the Expat Financial, what is that all about?
Expat Financial is primarily a portal for clients that live abroad who need international life, disability, travel, health insurance, as well as special risk insurance, to basically view the products that we offer and services and contact us for a quote, or with some plans they can even purchase right online.
So what's the difference between a domestic person, a person who's not yet left his country, and an expatriate?
Well, an expatriate would be someone who's living in a country that they don't have citizenship in. So someone might be from United States living in United Kingdom, for example, or someone from Israel who's living in France, for example. Yeah.
But from an insurance standpoint, don't these people have the same needs as everyone else?
Expats are generally, I guess that is the area that I work in, of course. They generally are unable to get domestic insurance because they're an expat, because they're not a local national, or they don't want to get it. So they can't join the national health system, for example, or because they're there for just a temporary period of time, or it's just not available. They could even be living in a country where there is no real national health system or services. So they need international health insurance.
Let's differentiate between the two. You said either they can't get it or they don't want to get their insurance from their home country. Let's go over those two. Why would it be that they can't get it? For example, I do know that a lot of policies say are not available to U.S. citizens. Why would an insurance company not want to cover a U.S. citizen?
A U.S. citizen in?
Let's say a U.S. citizen living outside the United States.
Generally, it could be some sort of regulatory reason, or they just have a rule that they just cover their own local nationals. And they're really not generally set up or desirable for an expatriate. Generally, because an expatriate could be very mobile, the place that they are living in as an expat may not have very desirable coverage, or again, as you say, it may not allow them to be insured for whatever regulatory or administrative reason.
I think there might be differences in terms of the types of insurance. Let's talk about the basic insurance, which would simply be a term life policy. It's just a bet, whether you live or die. When someone lives outside the United States, and I've personally seen this myself, having now been in Israel for about 20 years, people like that simply cannot get. They can't go online like someone in New York can and get a quote for a term life policy. Do you think that's all regulatory, or do you think the insurance companies have something else in mind?
I just think generally wherever that expat might be in a lot of countries, they're not. It could be regulatory, or it could be they're just not set up to cover people that are not a local national. So as you say, a lot of times it's just not available. So depending on the country that they're in and the citizenship, we can source some term life coverage for them, usually like up to 10 years, or we have associates that we can refer people to that might be able to source that coverage for them. Depending on their citizenship and where they're located. It's really depends.
When people are buying offshore policies, do these policies tend to be more expensive than, let's say, a parallel policy they'd find in the United States or in Canada, where you are?
Yes, the expat policies for life insurance or disability insurance are generally quite a bit more expensive than a domestic policy.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, one of the things, there's not a lot of choice in carriers that will do it.
All right.
There's very little, so that's a big thing.
No competition.
Yeah, and basically as well, if someone's living abroad, of course, the the risks are usually a little higher. Of course, depending on which country they're in. Some of the expat life insurers will have a list of countries that they can offer coverage to, and then they will also have a list of countries where they might have an extra premium loading. But I think a lot of it has to do with choice and logistics and that type of thing.
And do you think that the offshore companies that are covering people are as solid as the U.S. companies that they're familiar with in the States?
At least the ones that we would place someone with. Yeah, they generally are quite solid. A lot of the companies are could be like a Lloyd's of London, which are very well known and secure, or it could be someone like a Friends Provident International, which is basically an international arm of a large domestic carrier located in the UK, or could be other divisions. But that's one thing. If you are looking for life insurance and you're an expat, you want something that's secure. I know that some expats on the U.S. side will sometimes go back to the U.S. and get some term life coverage. There are a few carriers that will do that. It's not something we can arrange, but we can certainly refer people to brokers in the U.S. that might be able to help them with that.
A lot of times people do all sorts of kind of unusual traveling. They go backpacking in Colombia, where kidnapping seems to be a very big issue, or they'll end up in a war zone like Syria. Are these people able to get any sort of insurance?
Yes, it is possible. If they're going somewhere really dangerous, if they're looking for like a term life coverage for an expat, they probably have some major difficulty getting the coverage. We have insured a lot of people who are going to Iraq and Afghanistan and other high-risk areas. They will generally look at usually a Lloyd's of London type carrier, and it will usually be an accidental death and dismemberment. And they would have a rider that would cover acts of war, terrorism, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you think that people who are permanently leaving their homeland, it's important for them to have an insurance coverage in their new local area, or if they're just familiar? For example, let's say someone lives in the United States, moves to Israel, and he's planning to stay in Israel. That's it. Is it worth it to him to try and keep his U.S. coverage, or should he just go with the local policies in Israel?
Well, if he or she is left U.S. going to Israel, in terms of offering general advice, I would think probably a good idea if they can keep their U.S. coverage, especially if it was bought at a younger age. Again, they'd have to check with their supplier in the United States whether they can continue the coverage. But if it's a good solid policy, they should be able to. If they can get good local term coverage in Israel, that's probably a good idea as well. See if they can keep the U.S. and get some additional coverage in Israel. I would think. I can't comment any further than that.
Mm-hmm. And if a person is traveling around and he's subject to various jurisdictions in terms of not only income tax but estate tax, death tax, are there international policies that can be used to help deal with that problem?
There are, yes. You can either obtain a term life coverage to do that, but getting permanent insurance for expats is very, very difficult, I've found. There's not a lot out there.
And by permanent, you mean with some sort of savings component involved, or just
yes.
permanent that it's
yes.
a long term?
For permanent, long term, like for lifetime coverage, especially if there's a savings component, my experience has been extremely difficult or impossible to attain that, especially for U.S. citizens. I'm not sure exactly why, but that could be to do with either regulatory or tax reasons. But again, it's mostly what I've seen on the expat life side is primarily term coverage. Usually 10, 20, 30 years, but again, depends on really the citizenship of the expat and where they're located, whether it's even possible to get coverage, or whether, as well as what the cost is.
Mm-hmm. So let's go over the case then of someone who, again, these are my sort of clients, that my day job is that I'm a financial advisor. I run a company in Jerusalem called Profile Investments. We do financial planning and investments. We don't do insurance, but we do. We look at the sort of the big picture for our clients, and many of them are clients who have, grew up in New York and they retire to Israel, and they need some sort of coverage in terms of their insurance. They either are keeping it from America, which is like what you had said before, but when it gets to be a little more sophisticated, they're no longer able to get those U.S. policies. I know that you deal in international insurance, and you mentioned companies like Lloyd's of London. Are these companies working in most of the world, or do they even care where you are, or will they perhaps give you a problem if you're living in Israel?
I don't have any clients in Israel at the moment, but most of my clients are all over the world, but not presently in Israel. My understanding is that it really depends on each insurer will have different requirements of where they can insure an expat and where they can't. So it really depends on what which on the case, and it's something I could probably help you with.
All right. Listen, David, we're just about out of time. We've been talking to David Tompkins, who's the president of TFG Global Insurance Solutions. He's based in Canada. David, just in the last few seconds, tell us, how can people follow your work and follow you?
They can reach us on our website, expatfinancial.com, expatfinancial.com, and they have different policies that we have online there, as well as contact us if they have a unique situation which they need insurance for. Again, like international health, life, disability, also travel insurance as well.
Okay. David Tompkins of TFG Global Insurance Solutions, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Take care.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.